Well, it was 27 years ago this day that Margaret Thatcher demitted office as the Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. 27 years, which for me has gone by in a flash. And I've got to tell you that my hatred for Margaret Thatcher has not dimmed, not by a flicker. And someone said on Twitter today, a friend of mine, that, well, we've got things just as bad now under Theresa May, and I had to say, if you think that, you weren't there. Margaret Thatcher destroyed this country, destroyed everything that was good about this country, destroyed our coal industry, our steel industry, our automotive industry, our railway workshop industry, our shipbuilding industry. She systematically dismantled Britain, unshackled it from the floor, flooded its deep mines with 1,000 years of coal within, leaving us utterly dependent on foreign sources of energy thereafter. She sowed discord and hatred in the country, divisions which have never healed. And by strange chance, last Saturday, not Saturday past, the week before, I was at Old Trafford and sat next to the man who'd introduced me on the podium, on the platform in Trafalgar Square at the poll tax riot. It was a riot, all right, and I don't approve of riots, but it got rid of Margaret Thatcher because the poll tax, the most hated fiscal measure ever introduced in modern times in Britain, was the straw that broke the camel's back. A tax which required the dustman to pay the same amount for local services as the Duke. A tax so hated that even the Tories could no longer tolerate it. And it led to that picture of a tearful Margaret Thatcher moving away in her limousine, looking out the window, the only time she was ever known to cry. The only tears she ever shed were for herself. And later that day, 27 years ago, my 6-year-old daughter, then now a mother of 4, seeing John Major coming out of Buckingham Palace, asking me, "Who's that?" As well she might, because most of the country was asking the same question. I said, "That's the Prime Minister." And she replied, "Can a man be Prime Minister?" Because, of course, all of her life had been dominated by the ugly shadow of Margaret Thatcher. And we had a queen in Buckingham Palace, and we had a woman in 10 Downing Street, and that's the way, the natural order of things to a 6-year-old girl at the time. Now, of course, things have changed, at least in the palace. I joked earlier that the last time a British royal married an American, it resulted in the abdication crisis, because the British king insisted upon marrying an American divorcee. And she was white, and she didn't go to a Catholic school. How things have changed. The king had to abdicate rather than be allowed to marry an American divorcee. And now Prince Harry is proudly going to wed a black divorcee from America who went to a Roman Catholic school. No wonder, in an unconscious, almost Freudian slip, Arlene Foster, the DUP bigot, who is the leader of the Northern Ireland Assembly, unwittingly, inadvertently tweeted her congratulations to Prince William on his engagement. I said at the time there's going to be trouble over that because Prince William's already married with 2 kids and another one on the way. If he's got engaged to somebody else, there's going to be trouble. And it wasn't just that Arlene has got William on the brain. King William, Prince William, you get my drift. It was the sense of shock that must have descended, and not only upon bigots like Arlene Foster, but across the country. All those who've spent their lives squirming, worrying about miscegenation, mixed race coupling, and all of that, are now going to have to contemplate little dreadlocked children running around the gardens of Buckingham Palace. And they say there's no God. How wonderful, how joyous is that? How joyful we will be when we see Prince Harry's mother-in-law with her dreadlocks at the royal wedding in St. George's Chapel at Windsor Castle in May. I'll be there. Me and Sam Delaney have just made arrangements. We're going to set up a Delaney Hill where the sans-culottes can gather and try to see over the wall at all the celebrations therein. I'm glad to say we're not even going to be paying for it. The royal family are going to pay for it themselves, showing, I think, a necessary bit of humility in these straitened austerity times. After all, the taxpayer has just shelled out more than £350 million for the refurbishment of Buckingham Palace. A royal wedding on top of that might have proved unpopular. And on the subject of prime ministers, I've been reading Gordon Brown's book. He will not be interviewed about it. The note I've got here is that he's not doing any interviews about it, which is a funny way to sell a book, Gordon. No wonder there were such big piles of it, unsold, in the bookshop that I got my copy from, an author who won't do interviews about his book. And I don't think it's me. The last time I spoke with him on a public platform in the Usher Hall in Edinburgh during the Scottish referendum in 2014, he opened with the following words: "Ah, George, my mentor, my tormentor." Perhaps he thought I was going to torment him rather than mentor him if he came on the show this evening. But I wasn't, Gordon, because I think your book does you a lot of credit. And in particular, the section on Iraq. Now, I wouldn't ordinarily introduce this most vexatious of subjects onto talk radio, at least not willy-nilly, gratuitously, but I now have a peg so to do. And here's the peg. And I'm telling you this for what almost certainly will be the first time that you have heard it, even though it's a chapter and a statement almost incalculable in its importance. Gordon Brown reveals in the book that after the Chilcot inquiry had closed, fortuitously, he was leaked a document from the United States government which proves beyond any contradiction, if you thought there was any contradiction possible, proves beyond all contradiction that the U.S. government never believed that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction, and therefore allowed our Prime Minister, Tony Blair, to lie to the Queen, to her armed forces, to the Parliament, and to the public of Britain when he said that we were going to war to disarm Iraq of weapons of mass destruction. I say lie. It is possible, of course, that the United States government didn't tell their effective ambassador, Mr. Blair, their closest friend, Mr. Blair. And if that were the case, well, what would that say about them? That would make Tony Blair too stupid to be the British Prime Minister. If, on the other hand, they did tell Tony Blair what Gordon Brown later knew from a leaked document, then that makes Tony Blair too wicked to be the British Prime Minister. Now I'm going to be talking to a gentleman, and he is a gentleman, whose son, aged 21, gave his life's blood in Basra as a result of Mr. Blair's invasion and occupation of Iraq. This gentleman has supported the war, even after the loss of his son. He didn't want the British forces to be withdrawn from Basra because he thought that that would render his son's sacrifice in vain. But something happened on the way to the studio to this gentleman, which has changed his perspective entirely. And you'll be hearing all about it right after this.